Good morning, sir. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, I can, thank you.
Good. Please may I call Mr. De Alvarez?
Of course.
I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
Please could you state your full name?
Alan George de Alvarez.
Now, as you know, my name is Sam Stevens and I ask questions on behalf of the inquiry. Firstly, thank you very much for giving evidence today. You should have a witness statement in front of you, which is dated 9th of August 2022 and runs to 26 pages. Could I ask you to turn to page 24 of that statement?
Yes.
Do you see your signature there?
Yes.
And are the contents of that statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
To the best of my knowledge and belief, yes.
Thank you. Your statement now stands as evidence in the inquiry. I'm going to ask you some questions, but not on all of the matters within it. And I'll start with your professional background. You joined ICL Pathway in March 1997.
Yes, I did.
And that was to lead work on the security-related elements of the Horizon IT system.
The technical security, yes.
And you remain employed by Fujitsu as a program executive today.
Yes, I am.
But I understand you do not currently work with the Horizon IT system.
No, I don't.
Going back to March 1997, please could I ask you to briefly summarise your relevant qualifications and professional experience that made you suitable to lead the technical security work on the Horizon IT system?
So my background from my previous employment, which is in government for the Metropolitan Police Service, was in programme and project management and focusing on the delivery of IT systems for the Met Police Service, initially in payroll, but from the National Strategy for Police Information Systems, NSPIS, I was part of the programme management team under change management in respect of the OTIS programme, which is a secure networking of all the policing divisions and territorial units and HQ as a platform for future policing solutions, secure policing solutions.
And you remained in that role until December 2000.
Yes.
And at that point, your statement, you say that you became the applications delivery manager of the post office account. Could you briefly summarise what that role entailed?
Yeah, that role. And there is, I'm reminded this morning from a document that you put in front of me that it's slightly incorrect how I've explained that role in my statement. In my statement, I said I was responsible for all application infrastructure services. There were two units, application delivery, and there was infrastructure delivery. I was responsible for the application delivery aspects. My next role was when I had the joint responsibility.
And could you just clarify what you mean by the application responsibility?
The applications would be the business applications that were being developed for to support the initiative that the Post Office underwent called ERA, which was to introduce new products and services into the Post Office as offerings, predominantly to replace the business that was lost through the demise of the benefits agency business that went for the Post Office.
And then in September 2002, you say that you were the Director of Delivery for the Post Office account. Again, please just briefly summarise those responsibilities.
So those responsibilities were that I took overall control of all the new developments, both application and infrastructure developments that were to be deployed on the Post Office network.
And then between June 2005 and May 2009, what were you working on at that stage?
I was working on a number of projects and programs within Fujitsu. I'd done an assignment in the US, working with Cerner, who was the provider of the workflow application for the NHS program, and to oversee the redevelopment or the changes required on their system to make it suitable for the UK health market. After that, I worked in an internal program to reorganise how the UK and I were structured within Fujitsu. And then I also worked on the Warnings Index rehousing into a secure data centre. So in the Home Office, we had the Warnings Index application. We didn't have the infrastructure, but the infrastructure was held or housed within non-secure areas in the authority, and we took those into our secure data centres.
So during that period, you weren't working on the post office account?
No, I then returned to the post office account in 2010.
And you say May 2009 in your
I
statement.
was May 2009, sorry, yes.
A program director of Horizon Online, is that right?
That's correct.
Now, the part of your evidence sets out your recollections in respect of Horizon Online. I'm not going to be asking you questions on that today.
Okay.
It will be dealt with in phase 3. I do want to go back to your role in relation to security. We don't need to bring it up, but in paragraph 8 of your witness statement, you state that you were involved only in the security aspects of the Horizon system, and any aspects of this statement relating to that period are given on that basis. So, for example, you weren't involved in the design of the EPOS application.
No, it wasn't.
In your statement, you say that when you joined the Horizon IT project in March 1997, you carried out an assessment to identify areas where ICL Pathway needed to provide additional or different solutions relating to security.
Yeah, it was over a period of a number of months. So when I started, the first thing I had to do was understand the position as to what was contracted to be delivered, understand where we were at with regard to that delivery, and to satisfy myself that what was being delivered would actually meet the requirements that we've been set.
And you specifically referred to 2 issues in your statement. One is in relation to the contractual obligations in respect of an access control policy.
Yes.
And the second is in respect of automated key management systems.
The access control policy, certainly there were elements where that was still being written and that needed to be completed, and there was areas that required to be focused on to ensure that the access to the solutions were both secure and robust. The key management system, that evolved in as much as it wasn't a specific requirement, but it became evident that it was required for operational reasons, both for Post Office and also for ICL.
And my understanding of that is the original method using a Diffie-Hellman program was too cumbersome to roll out, and so the proposition was a automated key management system, which would be easier to, it would require less resources when rolled out over 20,000 counters.
Yes, so the Diffie-Hellman exchange is expected to be an automated exchange, and what had been implemented was a manual way of progressing an automated process. So it was very cumbersome. It took a lot of time. So if a postmaster had lost their postmaster memory card, it could take up to 30 minutes before they could actually get access to the system again, going through the process that required to go through manually, which was inherently designed as an automated, and we didn't have that automated capability in place.
And that's what the automated KMS was designed to
And that's
address.
what it was designed to do.
I want to look at both of those, but I'm going to start with the access issue, and firstly talk about access as a matter of generality. What do you understand if someone were to use the term remote access in the context of an IT project?
So remote access is where we give a facility for an individual not to be present where the actual servers containing the databases are located. So they will generally have access across a link, which back then wasn't as advanced as it is now, but typically we put in something like an ISDN line or PSTN dial-up where they would link remotely from a console but the actual data and the systems which do the processing of that data is in another location. So remote is you have a console which is able to access those systems that contain the data and process that data.
One of the issues that the inquiry is looking into is the ability for someone in a remote location to access and edit data within the counter systems. Would you consider that to be an example of remote access?
If that was permitted, that would be an example of remote access, yes.
If it wasn't permitted, what would it be?
It would be unauthorized access.
Did you listen to the evidence of Anthony Oppenheim, which was given to the inquiry on the 26th of October 2022?
Yes, I did.
He was asked questions about what's been termed as remote access and the issue that I've just described. And he said in evidence, what I can say is that any system you have, you have to have some kind of third line ability to get into systems and make changes. Would you agree with that as a broad proposition?
Yes.
Why?
Because computers and computer systems go wrong, data can become corrupted, and you need to have the ability to correct that situation.
So in the context of Horizon, in order for third line support to be able to provide effective support, did they need to be able to write data into branch accounts?
No, not to my understanding and to what we delivered as a secure system, no.
Could you explain why that's your view?
Well, when they say to write data direct into the account, we gave we use a management system for to manage the riposte elements of the system, and the riposte elements is a proprietary product, which is the EPOS system, and it consists of the application that runs on the post office counter and also the correspondence services where they harvest the information from all the post offices. We use the Tivoli management capability console to enable that the access to those systems were both robust, i.e. it was audited, you can control access, you can control what happens. And the solution that was put in place was, firstly, I don't believe you're able to change the data on the system. So the system, each of the messages do have digital signatures and that. What you can do is amend the solution by injecting new data to correct misbalances or miscalculations or where there's data missing. And that would be entered through the Tivoli management console. So it goes for a audited and controlled technical entry, but over that you would have a procedure as to you could only make such changes if you get there's a reason to do it and there's an authority to do, and the authority provided by the management and the processes in that area to make the changes. So whether a person could directly go onto a counter, from the solution that we delivered, they had to go for a Tivoli management system. There'll be a remote management console that's provided to remote users, and then there's a process to control how they can deliver data through that system that goes then into the post office.
I'm going to explore that now and try to work through it stage by reference to some of the documents. And in your witness statement, you referred to two, I think, contract control documents that describe the technical security specifications of the Horizon IT system. One of them is the access control policy, and the other is a security functional specification.
Yes.
I want to turn to the second version of the access control policy, please, and that's reference FUJ 3087989. You should hopefully see that on screen now. We see this is a document for general circulation, including that it goes to post office counters from the distribution list. And is it fair to say that the purpose of the policy was to determine who had access to what within the Horizon IT system?
That is correct.
Did you have any input into this policy?
The policy, I was a reviewer of the policy. So the person that wrote the policy was Belinda Fairthorne, that's the author there. So she is a access control specialist within ICL in secure access to systems, and so she wrote it, and I was part of the reviewing to make sure that it. So my role was to do a check that all the systems that we use within the Horizon system was controlled through this, i.e. it, and all the users that required access for whatever purpose, with the exception of post office staff, were identified, and we had a policy of what was called role-based access. So we would have a set of users which had defined privileges that aligned to the responsibilities of their role, and it confined they could only do things on the system that their role had responsibility for.
Yes, I do want to come to that shortly, but if we could stay with this document for the time being, and please turn to page 13, and towards the bottom there should be a diagram. Yes, thank you. Now, on the left-hand, this diagram here, on the left-hand side, there's a lined-off box which says POCL and POCL client domain. That, as I understand it, is the post office back-end servers which ICL wouldn't control.
That's correct.
In the middle, we have something described as a central services domain, and this is something over which ICL Pathway had control.
Correct.
And you've referred to it already, and we'll come to it again shortly. At the bottom, within central services domain, we see the correspondence servers, and that would have held one of the riposte message stores.
Yes.
And at the very bottom, that's described as the office platform service, and that's essentially the post office counter.
Yes.
Now, the post office counter, that would be running or described as a Windows NT workstation.
Correct.
And that workstation would run Horizon, which, and as we've heard, would also have riposte on it to run.
The riposte application, yes.
Yes. And I think you said this, but just to go through it in stages, that is a message system used to record data into a message store of things such as transactions that occurred in the branch.
Yeah, I think it's more accurate to say that riposte was a electronic point of sale system that was very focused on a postal type service. So they've developed a system that was very geared towards a postal type trade that went across those within a post office, stamps, etc. But riposte, I would step back and say that it's an electronic point of sale system, but was designed specifically for use in postal services around the world and was in use in other countries.
But it would do that by having a local message store in the branch.
Yes.
And to that message store, transactions, I'm paraphrasing here, but transactions would be recorded.
Yeah, all transactions that went through the system, whether successful or failed, will be recorded on that system.
And the design was such that once a transaction was logged to the message store in the post office counter, it would then be transmitted to riposte in the correspondence server.
Yes, it'd be harvested overnight in batches, and then the riposte central servers would take all the batches from each of the post office and then start to put those into a larger file for onward reporting.
And from your view, could a message be sent the other way, so from the correspondence server to right to the message store on the counter?
Yes, for the Tivoli management, yes, that is designed to do that.
Please could we briefly switch documents to FUJ 030 88002. Now, this is the other document that I referred to earlier, which you referred to in your witness statement, the Security Functional Specification. And this is essentially to describe the technical features of the security functionality of the Horizon system.
Yes.
Please could we turn to page 34 of that document? And if we could go down to 4.6. Thank you. So this, just for context here, is describing riposte, which we've been discussing. If we could go over the page to 4.6.2, we see it describes the riposte messages and the various types of information that can be included. In the paragraph that's at the bottom of the screen now, the last sentence says, only riposte can access messages and the message store is protected using Windows NT access control lists. Now, those access control lists, are those the group definitions, or is it referring to group definitions to which you were referring earlier? Namely, you ascribe a certain group certain permissions to access certain parts of the system.
That is correct. Yeah.
Please could I ask to turn the page on this document to where it is. Thank you. This describes riposte message servers, and the first sentence says, a riposte message server is typically a Windows NT workstation or NT server running the riposte services. So we said earlier that the counter was a Windows NT workstation. That's correct?
That's correct.
So for the purposes of riposte, the counter is described as a riposte message server.
Yes.
You're nodding, yes,
Yes.
Thank you. If we could please go back to the second version of the access control policy, that's FUJ 30-87989, and page 80, please. So, as I said, I took you to this document earlier. It's the Access Control Policy version 2. And this describes the System Management and Support Services domain. I think from that it's clear, but just to put it to you, that would include things such as the SMC and the SSC offering second and third line support.
Yes, correct.
Please could we turn the page, and there should be a diagram at the top, if we could have that in view. Thank you. So moving from the left here, this says post office counters, CFM, etc. Makes a call to the Horizon System Help Desk, which is then transferred on to the SMC. In the middle, 3 diagrams down, there's what looks to be someone sitting in a chair, and it says SMC with a line going to the right and SSC, etc. Do I take it from that this is describing, or this diagram is showing, access ways for both the SMC and the SSC?
That's correct. So the SMC would have direct access to the Tivoli Management Console. The SSC will have remote access, but not with the same privileges as the SMC. So
at this stage, with this diagram, please could you just give a broad outline, bearing in mind to try to make this as non-technical as possible, as to what the Tivoli access system was?
So Tivoli is a management system where it's able to control the software and the what is contained within the various servers and applications within the pathway and the Horizon solution. So if we wanted to put a new piece of software, or we wanted to inject anything onto that system through reference data, and it would go through the Tivoli management system. it would also have a full audit trail, an event audit as to what actions were taken by which role and which person that logged on under that role, which actions they took. So have a full inventory of auditing, whether it's machine or whether it's human actions, what happened on that system. So if a change was made on a system, it can actually determine what made that change. From an access perspective, it's also used to get events and that. So all systems will write events as to when if a failure occurs, it write a failure event. If access occurs, it writes an access event, and it will harvest those events that's captured by all the various systems and have it available. So if there's an issue, someone can retrieve those events to look to diagnose what that issue is as well. So it's used for to provide information for diagnostic purposes, and that's primarily what the SSC would get from those systems, is information to help them understand if they have a call with an issue as to why that issue might be occurring.
So just so we can break that into components then. So one use was to monitor events that are generated in the Horizon IT system.
To capture the events.
To capture the events, such that the support services can say, hang on, something's gone wrong here, we need to investigate.
Correct.
That was one use of Tivoli. Another use of Tivoli, I think you may have said it's referred to in the documents, but just so we're clear, it's right, is it that Tivoli could extract data from servers and branch computers?
I'd have to default to the technical people on that as to precisely what it could and could not do. But certainly it was used to distribute changes onto any of the systems and to record that distribution.
So that's the third one. And when we say changes onto the system, does that include if someone wanted to insert data into branch accounts?
I'm not aware to the details of what they can and cannot do. My awareness was it was used primarily for the software inventory management, and reference inventory management. So we had a record of what software was being used where. It was the appropriate level of software, and also what reference data was used as well to drive that software. Within the actual depths of Tivoli, the technical people would know what could and could not be done. But my understanding, and it's not through my knowledge of how it works, because I wasn't in that part of the solution, but my understanding was that messages are controlled via the riposte application, and therefore you would need access to riposte application to be able to generate a message.
Could you please turn to page 96? And further down, there should be 9.7. If we may go there, please. Thank you. This is just for to orientate ourselves that this part is for application support. Over the page, there should be a diagram at the top. And here we have at the top a diagram showing the SSC with their network. And this, the line that goes down to the bottom saying Pathway Data Center, there's a box that says Data Center Systems with Applications Middleware. Is that referring to the central services domain with the correspondence server that we...
Yes, it is.
Please could we turn over the page to page 98 and the heading 9.7.2. Thank you. Sorry, it's going to be 9.7.3, my apologies. This says that all application support users access data center systems via secure NT workstations, as described above. SSC, CFM, and Oracle support staff access the data center from other sites and may need to see DSS data. Therefore, all these support users should authenticate using tokens. And at the bottom, it says no application support users have access to post office counter systems. Errors here are diagnosed using logs of events extracted via Tivoli. So, is that your understanding of how the system should have operated at that point?
Yes.
And does that mean that the SSC should not have been able to access counter systems?
Not within the, correct, not correct, yes.
A slightly different point, though, is does that mean that the SSC shouldn't have been able to insert data into branch accounts through Riposte?
So all changes would need to go through the Tivoli Management Console, the Tivoli system, and therefore it needs to be authorised and auditable. As I said previously, I'm not aware of the depths of what changes were. I was more on the software levels of reference data changes. Whether and again, it's only an understanding, not through knowledge or ownership of that knowledge, that my understanding was only Riposte could inject messages into Riposte cache accounts.
I'd like to move to the third version of this access control policy, and that's FUJ 3087993. Thank you. We see the date at the top right is 18th December 1998, version 3.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you're on the distribution list of this. Did you remain a reviewer?
Yes. Although probably distribution, but by that time, yeah.
Would you have, if not formally a reviewer, would you have had any input into the decisions that went, or the changes that went into it?
Were we part of the group that made sure that what was in that was appropriate and correct?
Please could we turn to page 89 of this document? Again, this is just to orientate ourselves, but we're back with System Management Services domain, this time under heading 8 or number 8. But this again refers to support services such as the SSC, doesn't it?
Yes.
Please could we turn to the bottom of page 108. Again, this is because the numbering has changed, just for context. 8.7, we're dealing with application support, which we went to previously. Could I then please ask to turn to page 110? And if we could go down, preferably to keep in 8.7.2 and 8.7.3, if that's possible. Thank you. Under 8.7.2, it says application support roles are included in the relevant sections of the ACP. There are two main application support roles for SSC and CFM. Bullet point 1, application support users diagnose problems and have read-only access to the main pathway systems. Bullet point 2, application support managers can also correct data under controlled conditions. See subparagraph 873. And if we can go down to that in full now, please. Thank you. That says all application support users access data center systems via secure NT workstations as described above. Some may need to see DSS data. Therefore, all these support users should authenticate using tokens. Skipping a paragraph. Where update accesses to code and time permits, correction of errors is by reissue of a new version of the software via configuration management system. When faster fixing is required, software updates may be made by CFM, operational management role, directly after a request by SSC, subject to agreed pathway authorisation procedures. Stopping there, could you expand on what this paragraph means?
So that means that, again, for our Tivoli management system, we are able to download into the systems additional packages and that, so that clearly states that part of the ability of those downloads would be to inject additional data.
Could we turn the page, please? Thank you. It says, in certain agreed circumstances, there is a need to correct data which has been corrupted by faulty code. Now, stopping there, your understanding, what data was this referring to?
My understanding that would be transactional data recorded, would be my understanding of that.
And where would that transactional data be recorded?
On the correspondence service.
And would it be recorded in the branch accounts as well?
The branch, it would have been harvested from the branch counters.
Such corrections are made only by the application support manager and are subject to agreed authorisation procedures. You can skip the next sentence. In all cases, updates to code or data by application support staff require 2 staff to be present when the change is made and all such changes to be audited, identifying what has been changed, before and after values, and the individual who has made the change. Now, my understanding of what you said earlier was that when using the Tivoli system, that access gateway in itself audited all changes that were made to the system.
Yes.
So this second paragraph here, because it states that 2 members of support staff are required and the changes must be audited, does that mean that this was referring to changes made outside of the Tivoli system?
I cannot comment on that, but they were robust. So the person that would, so we had a CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, who was responsible for all operational security. That's Barry Proctor, and he would ensure that there were processes in place because all protection of systems and that are a combination of technical, procedural, and physical protection. And he was ensuring, well, he was accountable for ensuring that the process. I could read that in 2 ways. I could read that that is a second confirmation that before undertaking the actions, that there is the proper authority, and therefore there are 2 persons to make sure that the actions undertaken are correct. We call it in the industry 4 eyes, i.e. the person undertaking the correction, it gets the authority, and they're watched by another person to make sure that what they are actually implementing into the system is as per what that authority says. So that if there's a typo, that can be picked up, for example. And that will be a procedural control, and it could be viewed, and it's a long time ago now, but it could be viewed that it was because of the nature that you're putting data into the system that corrects what was previously there, or not replace it, but corrects, or if there's something missing, to insert that data, that they wanted to ensure that it was done, it was authorised, and it was done correctly. Because again, the Tivoli system would have had a record of what's done, but the reason and why it was done, the Tivoli would not have that. And that process would assure that that person had the right authorities and the right reason to make that change. So the technical solution could only just say who done what when, could not say why. So just looking at that and going back, there was a number of additional procedures put in place by Barry Proctor to assure that if anything on the system was done in certain sensitive areas, there was a process around it which made sure that what was done was properly authorised, and how that was enacted onto the system was correct.
So I'm taking that's your reading of this now, but is it the question I asked was, would the changes referred to here be made outside of the Tivoli system? As a matter of fact,
I wouldn't have expected it to.
Okay.
But I'd have to, again, remind myself in the security functional specification, because that would have the actual technical components that allowed the access. And from my recollection, it's the Tivoli system that we managed access and changed to the riposte elements of the system.
We still have the line, the sentence, sorry, no application support users have access to post office counter systems. Errors here are diagnosed using logs of events extracted via Tivoli. There has been a change between the policies here referring to data correction. Do you have any knowledge of the discussions that led to the inclusion of these paragraphs regarding the correction of data?
I don't recall that, no.
Can we please then turn to the group definitions document? It's FUJ 3087994. Now, this document is dated the 22nd of December 1998, and it's, I think if we just go down slightly, sorry, it's authored by you, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And it says group definitions for the secure NT build. If we turn to page 5, please, it sets the purpose of the document. And in summary, is it fair to say that this was to define the access rights of various groups to the various domains such as central services and the post office counters?
Yes, and the purpose of the document was to be able to give to the technical teams sufficient information so they implemented the policy correctly, because the policy is at a relatively high level, and therefore they needed additional information as to how to implement that policy into the technical solution.
In the second paragraph, under number 3, it says it should be noted that the pathway solution has moved on since version 2 of the ACP, which was issued, and as such, the groups defined at Appendix A do not always correlate with the roles defined in ACP. This will be addressed by feeding these role definitions into the current review of the ACP, which will be subject to a CP once all necessary changes have been agreed. We went to the access control policy earlier, which was, I think, the 18th of December, so a few days before this was drafted. When you drafted this, were you up to? Do you remember if you were up to speed with the likely changes that were to be made to version 3 of the access control policy?
I would need it to have been to create this document, yes.
Please can we turn to page 9? I think we'll need to flip this. Oh no, it's already done. Thank you. And this is a table later on in this, which my understanding is that this sets out the various groups and the various privileges that they had. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And on the left there, it says group name to be implemented, SSC, SSC apps man. Is that SSC management?
Yes, application management.
Thank you. Looking at the tools on the second column, the Tivoli remote console, is that the Tivoli system you were discussing earlier?
That's correct.
I think it's 3 down. There's one called R Client. Do you recall what this tool did?
No. It was a remote client, so but what that client actually did, I imagine it would be something that showed a visual view of what riposte system was, but that would be my assumption.
Would you have known at the time?
So much of this was derived from the technical people. So Glenn Stevens was the Tivoli person, so he was the one that technically would tell me the makeup of a remote console and the delivery management system. So I would have got that information from him.
Would you have known what access or privileges that tool allowed a person using it to have?
I would like to have thought so at the time, but now I can't remember.
if we go further down, there's a series of tools referred to with riposte first. It's fair to say these must be related to the riposte system. Just over halfway down, there's one called riposte put message.exe. Do you know what that tool was for?
From recollection, I can't be certain, but I could hazard that that would be to enable a message to be added into the riposte system.
And that would be, could it be insert a message with transaction data in it?
Yes, it was a riposte message, yes.
In the third column, it says NT servers, and below it says all servers. Would this mean that, would all servers include the counters?
Yes.
And in access rights, in the fourth column, it says read, write, execute.
Yes.
So that, just to go through, that means that the SSC management had writing privileges to all servers, including the post office counters, using a tool called riposte put message.
Yes.
So from that, is it right that the SSC could insert data into a branch account directly?
From my recollection, it would be through the correspondence service, from my recollection. I see all servers there, and all servers would also include the service that's at the post office counter. But from my recollection, it was through the correspondence service where it was harvested.
When security tests were run to test whether or not the final product was secure and to specification, would those people testing the system have had this document?
Yes, they would have.
And so, if they were testing it, reading this, would they be? Do you think they would be under the impression that they could be the direct right for SSC apps management to write transaction data into the branch accounts?
Potentially, but they would also have access to the design documentation for those particular modules. So they would have knowledge as to what those modules would allow and how it would allow it to happen. And they would enable that for the test analysis and also to write the test script to actually enact the test that we're enabling what's allowable and not enabling what's not allowable under the policy.
Is that what we've just come to from this document? Isn't that inconsistent with what's said in the access control policy, that there shouldn't be direct access to the counters?
If that's what is meant in this document, yes, but as I say, my understanding at the time, it was access was through the correspondence service, and that's where any corrections was made was my understanding, but that's my memory.
Thank you. Do you have any knowledge of how the riposte put message.exe tool, if it was used, how that would be audited, its use would be audited?
The use of all tools would be audited through the riposte management console. So, the activity management console. So this would go on to the riposte clients, and that would go through the remote console, and that would be able to audit what tools were being used by what person.
But are these not separate tools?
These are tools that were within the same workstation, and the activity management console would be the overall kind of framework for which actions were undertaken.
Earlier in your evidence, when I was talking about the Tivoli remote console and whether it could be used to insert messages or transaction information into branch accounts, did you not say that that was handled by riposte?
It is handled by riposte, yes. So it's a separate tool set, yes.
So in which case, if it's a separate tool set, is it right that it wouldn't be subject to the same audit requirements, the same audit process that the Tivoli remote console offers?
Potentially, but it will have its own auditing capability.
And do you know what that was?
Not from memory, no.
Please could I now turn to page 7. There's a group name on the left, first one, ICL Outsourcing Application SUP. Could you just help us with what that refers to?
That will be application support.
And who were application support?
I believe, but again, I'm just trying, that would be the second line up in, there was a, probably SMC, but at this stage, I can't
Can't recall.
recall.
Thank you. In terms of audit data, are you aware of, personally, of any audit data that was captured which may record keystrokes made by a sub-postmaster on the EPOS system?
No.
Are you aware if there was any system put in place to notify a sub-postmaster when changes had been made, when or if changes had been made transactions inserted into the branch accounts?
No.
Please could we turn to page 6. This describes the NT administration user. And it says the Windows NT operating system is provided with a super user known as the administrator. This user has full administration and configuration privileges, which is exercised at both system server and domain level. This capability cannot be removed from Windows NT. Pathway recognizes the power that this user has and the ability that a human user, using the administrator user, has to interfere with the day-to-day operation of the Pathway solution. To address this, Pathway will limit and restrict the use of the NT administrator user. This will be achieved by renaming the administrator user on all NT servers so that it is hidden from the system. The account name and password will be specified by the Pathway Security Manager, which will be strictly controlled and stored in a secure safe, and restrict fully administrator privileges to the operational management role. Use of this role will be subject to the management and procedural controls set out in the Pathway Code of Practice. Just in lay terms, could you please explain the problem that's identified here?
So every system will have would create the would enable or so every system that we use in computing always has the ability to enable its recovery from the most extreme of failures, and that requires people to go in to the system with privileges which enable them to effectively manipulate the application for whatever reasons it's required to manipulate the application. So on a Windows NT, it's or any Windows device, it's called an administrator, so they can make changes in that with higher privileges they have to make changes to be able to access a system where people lost passwords or whether something's non-recoverable, they're able to get into the depths of the system. With Oracle systems, it's called root user. All systems have this, and sometimes it will be necessary if there's a fatal error, that someone would need those privileges to recover from a fatal error. So Barry Proctor, who's the security manager, the controls that he put in place was he controlled the passwords for those, and those passwords were locked in a safe. If there were certain authorized people that could access that safe, and there were manual controls where they'd have to log in and log out, and when they use that password, because they have to get authorization to use it from the security manager or the deputy, when they use that password after using that, Barry Proctor or the security manager will reset that password so it cannot be reused again. And again, that goes under the secure processes. So it's recognised that in all computer systems, there may be a requirement to be able to access the system and have effectively privileges to make whatever changes into that system is required to get it going again. So with regard to the NT system, it would have access to things like audit logs as well. So it would be able to, if misused, remove audit trails, etc., of activities that's happened on that system.
Using this function, so that's the audit logs, using this function, would a user be able to access the message store?
They'll be able to access the message store. They would not be able to make changes without going through riposte.
And the security systems you've described in terms of hiding the, essentially taking the password away from general circulation, save for when someone requested it from Mr. Proctor, that was a human-based system in that it required Mr. Proctor.
No, that's procedural. Well, he delegated down to management layers, and that would be set out in PA standard 010 code of practice. So.
And apologies if you said this in your answer, but just so we're clear, could a remote user use the login and use this administrator feature if they had the password?
Yes.
So if I may just take one more point before a break, it will take me to the end of this theme.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Thank you. Please could I ask to turn up FUJ 30888036. Now this is a document you referred to earlier, having seen this morning, dated the 2nd of August 2002. It's a secure support system outline design. Please could we turn to page 9 of that document. Thank you. It says the SFS, which is the Security Functional Specification, mandates the use of Tivoli Remote Console for the remote administration of data center platforms. This records an auditable trail of logins to all boxes accessed by the user. It is a matter of considerable discussion and correspondence that TRC is slow and difficult to administer. This has led over time to BOC, I think Belfast Operations Centre, is it?
Yes.
To BOC personnel relying heavily on the use of unauthorised tools, predominantly our client, to remotely administer the live estate. Now, pausing there, having seen that, do you recall what our client did or could do?
Not in seeing that, no.
Its use is fundamental for checking of errors. The tool does not, however, record individual user access to systems, but simply record events on the remote box that administrator access has been used. No other information is provided, including success fail, so it is not possible to simply audit failures. The use of such techniques puts pathway in contravention of contractual undertakings to the Post Office. And the proposals in this document have been implemented. A CP will be after the proposals in this document have been implemented, a CP will be raised to phase out TRC or limit its use to exceptional situations. I don't want to ask you about that tool or what happened going forward, but I do want to turn to page 15. Thank you. If we could get all of 4.3.2 in, thank you. This refers to third line and operational support, and this would include the SSC, wouldn't it?
Yes.
It says all support access to the Horizon systems is from physically secure areas. Individuals involved in the support process undergo more frequent security vetting checks. Other than the above, controls are vested in manual procedures requiring managerial sign-off, controlling access to post office counters where update of data is required. Otherwise, third line support has unrestricted and unaudited privileged access, brackets system admin, to all systems, including post office counter PCs. The ability to distribute diagnostic information outside of the secure environment. This information can include personal data as defined by the Data Protection Act, business sensitive data, and cryptographic key information. The current support practices were developed on a needs-must basis. Third-line support diagnosticians had no alternative other than to adopt the approach taken, given the need to support the deployed Horizon solution. Now, it's fair to say that that is entirely against what the access control policy says should happen. Do you agree?
I agree.
Do you know how it was that the SSC were able to get such access to post office counter systems?
I have no knowledge, no.
Do you know why testing didn't pick that up?
We would have tested the solution that was designed to be implemented. And that's not part of our design or implementation. So if they had tools that were not part of our solution, we would not have had that in our test environment.
We saw earlier, we went to our client, that was in the group definitions.
Yeah.
And isn't the purpose of the security testing to ensure that the requirements of the access policy are met in the system?
Yes.
And so isn't this exactly what the testing is going to, so this is what the testing should find out, basically, whether or not SSC had this access?
It would determine what console had what access. Who had access to what console was then procedural. So if it was on the SSC console, yes.
And do you have any knowledge of how the SSC developed the use of these, let's call them access pathways to post office counters?
No.
So I think that's a good time to pause, as I'll be moving on to another topic.
Yep, that's fine. Thank you very much, Mr. Stevens. 11:30, all right?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Fine.
Good morning, sir. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, I can, thank you.
Good. Thank you, sir. Right. I want to move on to some aspects of design and testing. In your witness statement, you refer to a Jeremy Fawkes, and that's spelled F-A-W-K-E-S. The inquiry has received evidence from Jeremy Fawkes, spelled F-O-L-K-E-S. Just want to check those are the same people you're referring to.
Yes.
Yeah. And did you listen to Mr. Fawkes' evidence last week? Sorry.
No.
I'd like to turn up his witness statement, and that is WITN 05970-100. And if you could go to paragraph 84 on page 28. And what he says there is, except in areas where we had an explicit right in the contract to a document, such as the security functional specification, we only had limited or partial visibility of the emerging pathway systems or of their design/development approach. This meant that we could not gain confidence of what pathway we're creating or its suitability or fitness for purpose, or have confidence in how pathway were developing, and therefore what quality mechanisms were in place. In your view, does that represent a fair position between post office counters and pathway in 1999?
So my recollection in 1999 was they had no formal reviewing rights to the technical design documentation. However, from my perspective and in the security, I encouraged myself and I encouraged my team to ensure that we.
Oh, so I'm sorry if you. Sorry to interrupt you. It sounds like the transcript has stopped. So if you could just pause there, we'll just investigate how long it may take. Sorry, sir. I think we'll need 5 minutes to resolve.
All right. I'll stay close to the screen, but I'll go off screen. So just let me know when you're ready to start. All right.
Thank you. Sir, can you hear me now?
I can, and I'm coming back.
Thanks. So, sorry, sir. As quickly as it went off, it came back on.
Yeah.
I apologise. I interrupted you for the transcript. The question I had asked was whether you thought that Mr. Folkes's summary of the situation regarding visibility to documents for Post Office was a fair one, and you were giving your answer.
Yeah, so from a point of policy with technical design documents, the Post Office were not formal reviewers. However, in a number of, in my area, I certainly work closely both with Jeremy and formerly with Gareth Lewis, because from my recollection, Jeremy had he was with Gareth within the security unit, but I think he had a wider role as well. And it was important because, from my perspective, when I come into the account, I was advised that security, or where we were with regard to delivering the security products, and my focus was very much on things like the cryptographic products and that sort of stuff, were one of the reasons that we were limiting our ability to deploy. Not the only reason, but one of the reasons. So, for example, there's a number of documents with the key management design. We were quite open with Jeremy and his team. He had a couple of people that he assigned to oversee the testing, security testing and things. Certainly, I had no objection to him looking at things like the technical environment descriptions, the key management system designs and that. And he did comment and feedback some very useful information in those areas. But as a formal reviewer, no, they didn't have those rights.
So your evidence is that you would show to Post Office, the people you dealt with at the Post Office, technical documents?
Where appropriate, yes.
Is there any documentation? Have you seen any documentation that shows you sending the documents to Post Office?
When I say send the document, certainly we had meetings to review. Certainly we certainly sent the technical environment description. We certainly had meetings with regard to the KMS and random number generators, etc., where we needed his input. Or his faults, let's say, input. We wanted to assure ourselves that the direction we were taking would be acceptable to the authority.
So is it that you would have meetings where you would discuss the matters?
Yes.
But would you, just to clarify, would you formally send the documents to Post Office counters?
I wouldn't formally myself send them, no, because all correspondence would go through our PMO on a formal.
Mr. Folkes goes on to say, one specific gap was any access to software quality information or metrics, such as number of bugs found in testing or the amount of rework being done, both of which are good indicators as to the stability or maturity of a product. Again, do you consider that to be a fair reflection at the time?
At that time, I only had responsibility for the security testing team. and they had two people which they assigned from the from the authority. I forget their names. One was called Clifford, but I forget their names. And we would have reviews, and they would actually base themselves for periods of time each week where our security testing were located, so they weren't restricted from that area. We'd have conversations, but I would be very keen to get their view with regard to the business impact aspects of any defects that we had, because with any software system, there could be defects. There's a balance between risk and time, so that you very rarely would you see a system go live with no defects. And I wanted to ensure that the defects we were focusing the teams on fixing were those that would be deemed of sufficient priority, you know, within the post office. If we didn't fix it, it would stop us going live. So we did have discussions, and we had triage sessions with the people that he allocated or post office allocated to work with our own testing.
And in your statement, you referred to the Pinnacle system, which was used to log defects as they arose or as they were found in testing.
Yes.
And in broad terms, is it fair to say that that was a sort of central repository of bugs, errors and defects, and the work that was going on into investigating them and resolving them?
Yes, that had a history of the defect and how it was resolved.
Who operated that system, the Pinnacle system?
It would be within ICL Pathway. I don't know which area of ICL Pathway.
Are you aware of anyone outside of ICL Pathway who had either read or write access to the Pinnacle system?
No.
And specifically, did anyone at Post Office have read or write access to the Pinnacle system?
Not to my knowledge.
So when you said you were discussing defects with them and seeking their views on business priority, etc., those were pinnacles that you put forward, or information you put forward to him?
Yeah, we'd often do a review of an Excel. We'd dump to Excel or print to Excel outstanding or open defects, which would have the high level description. It wouldn't have the detail of the analysis and that in that, but it have sufficient for us to have a discussion around if this defect or this fault still existed in the system, would that prevent us going live?
I'd like to bring up your statement now, and it's paragraph 37B on page 14. So it's WITN 00480. Do you have your witness statement in front of you?
Yes, I do.
It appears we can't bring it on the screen, but I will read out the relevant parts. Could I ask you to turn to paragraph 37B on page 14?
37B.
37B, yes,
Yeah.
please. It says, my team also needed to clear defects raised through testing and resolve them prior to the go live of new release 2. Not all defects that we had agreed with Post Office should be fixed. So not all defects that we had agreed with the Post Office should be fixed before going live had, in fact, been fixed in the planned timescales. Just pausing there, did you think at this point that the Horizon IT system was ready to go live when it did?
My recollection is it was one of the contributory factors to another delay. So it wasn't the case we went live with those unfixed because they was not fixed. It was another contributing factor. There was a series of delays. It wasn't the only one, but I was fully aware that the preparedness of the security and where we were with regard to the defect position, we were not able to go live or get acceptance sign off. It would become an acceptance incident in that defect and probably be, from the information that we received and discussed, it would probably be deemed as a high acceptance incident, which would prevent us going live anyway. So it's a case of, from recollection, it's one of the contributing factors to a number of the delays that we had during release 2, new release 2.
So from a security perspective, when it was released, did you think there were any material problems with the system?
From a point of the security products, no. That weren't, and those outstanding defects were fully visible to the authority.
You go on to say, you first referred...
Sorry, Mr. Stevens, can I just understand that last answer in conjunction with the ones before? The sentence that Mr. Stevens read to you, is that an acceptance that not all defects had been fixed by the time the go live started? Or were you saying that because not all the defects were fixed, there were delays before the go live started?
It's that second.
Right. Okay, I understand. Thank you.
In your statement, you refer to the people at Post Office. You were speaking of earlier, Cliff and another who you said were there for looking at security testing. And one of the things you say again in paragraph 37B is they also, 37B, they also reviewed the position around unresolved defects at the point of exiting the security test phase, and they audited test results and pinnacle content for accuracy. Could you expand on that part? They audited test results and pinnacle content for accuracy.
So the test results would be through the test report. So the test report would have a detail of all the tests run, those that couldn't be run for whatever reason or were not run, the failures, and the outstanding faults or pinnacles in the system. When I say inspect the pinnacles, we would discuss the detail of each of the pinnacles so they understood from a business perspective whether or not, how to classify those and whether they become acceptance incidents or not.
And when you say audited the pinnacle content, again, is that pinnacles that you provided to them?
I think it's reviewed as opposed to audited. Reviewed.
Could I please ask for FUJ 3078278 to be brought up? This is a ICL Pathway Programme Office monthly report from May 1998.
Mm-hmm.
Could I turn to page 17, please? Sorry, I think, could we, oh no, that's it, sorry, my apologies. So security and audit, this section. Would you have contributed to this report?
Yes, I would have.
It says progress for NR2 continues to be slow, which is reflected in the secure test statistics. The requirements for security has exposed the lack of management and control over the platform structures. This is causing difficulties in the application of security. Please could you expand on the lack of management and control over the platform structures?
From memory, I would likely be referring at that point to there were a number of defects raised because the required controls were not in place in the solution that was delivered into our test environment. So at the point of testing, the controls that we should have there or the security products that enforce those controls were not either delivered or configured on our test environments, and therefore we had to raise defects to get those into the baseline of the solution that could then be re-delivered into the test to check that those now exist. So that's not through 100% exactly why I wrote that, but that would be my interpretation of that.
And what was done? Was anything done to change that?
Yes, we'd have to get those fixes in, because each one of those would be highlighted by a defect that would be raised as to why there's a missing control, there's a missing element of security, and we'd have a failed test associated with it.
In your witness statement, you refer to the, as we said earlier, automated key management system at some length. Are you aware of the automated key management system having any involvement with or being a cause of sub-postmasters seeing discrepancies in their branch accounts?
It would not have, no.
As I understand it, that's purely a matter of encryption, is it?
It's the management of the encryption keys to be able to do that across the distributed estate, yes.
Did you have any involvement in the acceptance process?
No. So not in the process itself. We were a key feed into the process for our test reports and analysis of the remaining defects within those test reports, but I was not party to any of the acceptance process discussions, meetings, or reports themselves.
So that's all the questions I have. We do have some questions from recognised legal representatives. I think Mr. Steen is first on the list, I think.
All right, over to you, Mr. Steen.
Thank you, sir. I represent Mr. Alvarez, a large number of sub-postmasters, mistresses and managers. I'm instructed by Howe & Co solicitors, and I've got a few questions for you that deal with a document which will go on the screen in a moment, which is found at FUJ 6071. And we go to page 1 of 914, please. Now, this document is, as you can see, the agreement between Post Office Counters Limited and ICL Pathway Limited for the Information Technology Services Agreement for bringing technology to Post Office. So it's the baseline agreement. The codified agreement then sets out various stages of the document. Different parts of it refer to different aspects of the implementation of Horizon. So we're going to look first of all at page 91 of 914. Now, this is a schedule, Schedule A02, Policies and Standards. And set out within this, therefore, are policies and standards defined in the schedule to apply to all relevant aspects of POCL services unless amended. So what we have under this particular section of the codified agreement are various policies and standards that need to be applied. And in particular, I'm going to ask you about prosecution support responsibilities under the codified agreement. Page 97 of 914, please. And if we can centre on the section which is at 418 and 419, prosecution support. Thank you. Now, I appreciate, Mr. Alvarez, you may not have been taken directly to this before within the bundle of papers that you've got, so I'm just going to read it through. Prosecution support. The contractor shall ensure that all relevant information produced by the POCL service infrastructure at the request of POCL shall be evidentially admissible and capable of certification in accordance with the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984. It then goes on to refer to two other parts of legislation applicable in Northern Ireland and Scotland that are similar. And then at 419, at the direction of POCL, audit trail and other information necessary to support live investigations and prosecutions shall be retained for the duration of the investigation and prosecution irrespective of the normal retention period of that information. So in short, what we have here is that there is a need for the system to be able to provide evidence which is evidentially admissible and capable of certification in accordance with the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. The second part then is about document retention for investigations and prosecutions. So do you understand what the purpose of this particular policy is?
I do understand the purpose of that policy, yes.
During the time when you were working on Horizon, from your perspective, which we understand is security, access, infrastructure in relation to that, maintenance of audit trails so that access can be considered and looked back upon, what was done to ensure that any access required under these provisions was recorded?
So with regard to prosecutions and that, I was not party to any, I had no engagement with the area of pathway that supported prosecution. So my focus was the delivery of the security as per the standards. So I think, if I remember rightly, preceding this section, there's a set of standards, like the post office security standards and things we had to comply with. With regard to my knowledge of Police and Criminal Evidence Act, I'm not an expert, but I am sufficiently knowledgeable in the areas that impact computing systems because of my work with the Met Police. I'm trying to think now because so long ago. I think it's section 69, which basically puts the umbrella of any computer data or extract from computer systems comes under, I think, the general, if I remember right, the general view of documentation, and therefore we needed to, so my element would be the last element of what the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, from my understanding of it back, well, now, remembering back, would be that can we provide a level of, I'm not trying to use the word evidence, but assurance that the data that has been produced to support any prosecution is complete, and if there's been any, it's not been tampered with, or if it's any changes, that the changes to that data is readily auditable from a computing aspects. But from my understanding of the Act, it's more about the case working and how you know, making sure that the data that's being provided or the documentation being provided is relevant to the case that's being formed. Then the completeness of that data for the purposes it's going to be used for, obviously would be through the assurance that the data that we captured in the riposte system was complete. And then my element would be the third element, that should there be any requirement to change that data, and that data is auditable, and any changes able to be understood, and the rationale for those changes. Well, on the system, we can say what was done. The rationale would be the wider policies that was put forward by Barry Proctor with regard to those various processes that you could only do certain things on the system under certain instructions and certain authorities.
You mentioned a number of times in your evidence just a few moments ago, my element would be the last element. Now, are you saying that you had direct responsibility for one aspect of evidence that was being produced for the purposes of investigations?
No, I had direct responsibility for the system.
Right. Okay. Well, let's stay with that last element that you're describing, which is the third element that you've mentioned now twice. That third element, who had responsibility for ensuring the data integrity of information that was provided for the purposes of investigations and prosecutions?
I'm not aware who had that responsibility.
Are you assuming that there was somebody?
I would expect there to be, yes.
Right. And with your knowledge and indeed the amount of time that you spent working within this particular company, can you not help us with who that's likely to be?
Typically it'd be the Chief Information Security Officer.
Right. Who was?
Barry Proctor.
Barry Proctor. So that's Mr. Proctor. Was he based at your office?
Sorry?
Was he based at your office?
He was based in Feltham. I was based in Bracknell.
Right, okay. So you think Mr. Proctor would have been the person most likely to have had dealings with questions, requests for information that related to prosecutions, is that correct?
Is an assumption I have, yes.
Right.
But I don't have actual knowledge of that.
Now, you've been taken to a variety of different policies by Mr. Stevens, who's been asking questions on behalf of the inquiry. Can you help with your recollection of policies that related to the provision of data and information for investigations and prosecutions?
No.
No, because you didn't have any dealings with it, or no, because they didn't exist?
I was not aware of any, and I did.
Do you think there should have been some?
Yes.
If such policies did not exist, who would you say would have been responsible for that gap?
It would, again, I would put it under the areas of operational, so it would come under Martin Bennett, who Barry Proctor reported into. But my knowledge of, I was aware that people provided information for evidence, but that was done from our customer services side and the operational side.
Right. So customer services, what do you mean the help desk side would provide?
Well, customer service, not so much the help desk, but customer services would be the service management. So there's a management layer within our customer services, headed up by, at that time, Steve Muckar, my recollection. And he would be there for all the management of the services that we actually provide to the operational services and that we provide to the post office once it's gone live.
Now, your work concerned the security of Horizon and the protection of the system from unauthorised access. Do you agree?
Yes.
What arrangements were put in place to allow investigators investigating possible criminal offences, or indeed investigating maybe matters that might go to the civil courts? What arrangements were put in place to allow investigators, instructed by perhaps the prosecution or the defence, to access the system?
I can't recall.
With your background, working within a police force, you understand that sometimes investigators need to, in fact, interrogate the system themselves. Police investigators, as an example, yes?
Yes.
And sometimes they may need assistance in gaining access onto a system so that they can ensure that the data within it, or indeed the system itself, is working properly. Yes?
Yes.
Does that not come within your department?
So within what we put, I would need to refresh my memory on the audit and the roles that we set up for the audit policy. So we had an audit solution which retained the data required, but where changes that were made. I cannot recall all the roles that were set up for that area, and I was not required to review by the company what was put in place with regard to the support of prosecution.
Were investigators from within the Horizon system? You've described the potential for people from the help desk side of it, or the support system side of it, providing information to assist investigations or prosecutions. Would those individuals have to leave an audit trail specifically related to investigations and prosecutions?
Not specific to investigation and prosecutions, to my awareness, no.
Was that something under your control, the question of whether somebody is having more general access, i.e. support desk access, or investigation and prosecution access? Was that something under your control?
Not under my control, no.
Under whose control was that?
That would be under anyone that's had access to the system when it's gone operational, would be under the control of either the security manager and or the service director.
So back to Mr. Proctor.
Barry Proctor and or Stephen Muckar.
Thank you, sir.
Anyone else?
Yes, I believe Mr. Page has some questions.
Fine. Over to you, Ms. Page.
I also appear for a number of the sub-postmasters in this inquiry as core participants. My name's Flora Page. If I could please ask for document number FUJ 000077861 to be displayed. This appears to be a risk register with your initials under the column C, which you see has the word WHO at the top.
Yes.
And am I right in thinking that that means that those risks which have your initials against ADA, that means that you were the risk controller, if you like, or the person in charge of that risk?
Yes.
What we see on the first row is a risk which is categorised as A at row 7, and the description of the risk is migration complexity coupled with failure of other delivery units to meet KMS and VPN dependencies to required delivery dates and specification impacts delivery date and costs. The whole migration issue has been loaded with added complexity and risk due to the removal of the incremental migration strategy. Can we just sort of decode that a little bit? Is this, from the dates elsewhere on this schedule, it looks as if this is referring to the rollout itself, the full national rollout, 99 through 2000. Is that right?
That would be, if it's the queue management system and VPN, that's we would have to deliver that in new release 2 to be able to roll out, yes.
And what it seems to be suggesting is that there was a removal of an incremental migration strategy. Does that suggest that everything was then going to be rolled out in a sort of a big bang?
In a faster pace. And again, this is, I saw this just before I come in here and trying to back my memories. There was a number of migration approaches put forward, some which was looking at kind of incremental product migration and things that we were looking at doing. But this was very much from just trying to go back to my mind, there was a change in the migration strategy, which did, whether it's totally big bang, but it effectively said that we would roll out with the predominance of all the functions that's required, which added complexity because the KMS, and specifically the VPN element of the KMS, was high risk. It was high risk that we had to carefully manage and put mitigations in place to make sure when we enabled the VPN, what we did not do was lose connectivity that we couldn't recover to all the post offices. So when there are changes to migration strategy, so what we would do, we'd have a migration design. We'd make sure that how we implement that element of that migration is fully tested. We've what is our recovery position on testing that, and the change of strategy increased that risk that we had to go back around our migration design to assure ourselves that the risk was manageable.
Was the driver for changing that strategy to roll out faster?
I was not privy to those discussions, so but it did accelerate the deployment.
If we scroll down a little, there's also a risk at the last one, which is risk 4, again with your initials.
Yes.
And it says here that, I won't necessarily read it all, but it says from about halfway down, the level of change planned for the C14 migration will make this much more difficult to achieve due to space management, communications, logistics. And then it talks about the risk of there being no clear management plan for this coordination, and there's likely to have I'm not quite sure what it leads on to, but am I right in thinking that this is suggesting that there's quite a lot that needs to be, with this sort of much more holistic, if I can put it that way, migration. There's a lot to manage with space, with resources, with physical structure. Is that what we're getting at here?
Yeah, it needs to be a coordinated management plan to bring it all together.
And so again, it's the fact that everything's being done at once, is it, that makes this more of a risky endeavour?
It made it more complex, yes, and therefore increased the risk. And this was specific to the data centre migration, I believe, this aspect. The CI3, CI4, because when you said deploying the counters, and I said yes to that, I suddenly, it kind of, now looking at this one, this looks very geared to the data centre migration elements. Now, the data centre migration was, not only were we, no, sorry, I'm going to retract that. So, no, this is the deployment.
Yes. All right. Well, can I just turn to one other document and just see if this has anything to do with it or if it's part of the same issues to do with sort of trying to roll things out in one go. This document is FUJ 000-78691. And this refers to the introduction, I think, of an element of the KMS system. Is that right?
Yes.
And this dates from, we can see at the bottom there, 31st of March 1999. So again, this is preparing for the main rollout, isn't it, later that year and into 2000. Is that right?
Correct.
And if we scroll down and we look at, in fact, if we go to page 3, and we scroll down, the scope in the background tells us a little about, I think it's right to say, this particular element of the KMS. But what we also see further down when we get to TWC release approach is that the first paragraph finishes with the sentence, if the release is not available in time, then we have to decide to move to the latest TWC or possibly stay at the version used at NR2. And it goes on to explain why. It says that there is a known bug in one of the versions of what was to be rolled out. Is that fair? Is that a decent summary?
Yes, that's how I read that, yes.
And because of that known bug, if we turn to the next page and we sort of just look at the end of what's been agreed, it seems it's been agreed with you that they will go ahead on the assumption that the enhancement version will not be available in the KMS timescales. The testing described in this specification will make use of TWC version 4.0. Again, is this an example of things having to be rolled out on a quick and all-together basis, and therefore perhaps some enhancements not catching up in time, not being ready in time? Is that what we're looking at here?
This particular one would not be specific to the deployment to post office. This specific one will be an issue within one of the versions that we was using in KMS. And I need to know, I would need to look at the faults to understand what that is, but if there's a known issue, and with a version that we have, we very often are able to put workarounds in to enable us, workarounds into the system so that that doesn't become an issue in operating the KMS.
What I suppose I'm getting at here is, do you think, looking back, things were being rolled out too quickly?
Do I think so? I'm very conscious that a number of times we had to delay the rollout because we collectively, certainly from my area, said that we were not ready to. And from my perspective, there's always pressure. I mean, there's pressure in terms of you put pressure on yourself to meet the timescales that you set. There was pressure from the customer to deploy this, pressure from our own organisation. But I never felt that if after assessing, and when this agreed with Alan Dalvise, that would have been assessed with my architects, and that to understand what is the implications of that, can it be worked around? So I need to know the fault and how that was developed and how we actually I would assume there's a workaround. That we would have to, you know, it becomes a judgment where in this particular instance, it was assessed that this would not have any detrimental impact in our ability to manage the cryptographic keys. It would just mean that there would be something that we know about that we'd have to work around, and until that's fixed, that workaround would be in place, typically requiring additional manual processes, typically, but again, I need to understand what this bug was. So from my perspective, if I or my team said we were not ready to go with our products, I would be supported by my management. They wouldn't like it, they put a lot of pressure on. And one of the things that we had, so there's two elements to this. On the KMS, it was clear that the amount of work to put an automated key management system was far greater than we originally estimated. And we had to deliver it in two elements to be able to maintain the timescales. And we had to put a proposal forward how we can do that safely. And so it's part of managing a large complex program. It's is there a way forward where everyone understands the risk, they understand the issue, and they have the right way to, they have the right processes or workarounds in place that issue doesn't become or that risk doesn't become an issue in production. Invariably, it adds cost to the run costs, and therefore you don't want to go live. So that would be part of a number of elements where is there a suitable workaround to go forward with? If so, is that affordable? Is that the right way to do? And that would be the decision making. I can't remember the specific one here.
And when you say that your management wouldn't have liked it, but they'd have supported it, who were you referring to?
So at that time, it would be Mike Coombs, who was the main person, who was the programme authority director there. But I actually reported into the structure of Terry Austin.
Right. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Is there anyone else who wishes to ask any questions?
No, sir, nil return.
Well, thank you very much then, Mr. Dalvares, for firstly providing your written evidence, and secondly answering all the questions you have today, which, as will be obvious to you, have gone wider than your written evidence. So thank you for assisting.
Thank you, sir. The inquiry team, we've got another witness to come, but could we ask for an early lunch and then start the witness once we've had that lunch?
Yeah, by all means. And what time do you suggest, Mr. Stevens?
Would 1:30 be okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.